All right, everybody, we are back. This is Creativity is the Cure. I am your host, Malcolm Moore, and today I have a very special guest, my friend, JC Gabel. How you doing, JC?
Doing great, Malcolm.
Let's start out by telling me all about Hat and Beard Press.
Wow, yes, great question. Hat and Beard Press is almost 10 years old, and prior to making books, I used to run a magazine, so I've kind of always been an independent publisher.
What was that magazine?
Stop Smiling, the magazine for high-minded lowlifes, which published from 95 till 2009. It had a nice, long, almost 15-year run.
And I love magazines. I don't care what the younger people say.
Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, I'm seeing this now because I'm making a book for the 30th anniversary of the magazine.
Oh, really?
Where we compile all these interviews, in part because so many of the people we talked to are now dead. We were lucky in that we got to... The premise of the magazine was that we were sort of emulating what at the time I would call the glory days of magazine publishing, which was the 60s and 70s period.
Okay.
Which was, 60s Esquire when George Lois was the art director, and there's those famous 60s covers, where Muhammad Ali is Saint Sebastian on the cover with all the arrows in him. Some of these things have become kind of art direction, kind of history now. The first 5 years of Rolling Stone before sort of arena rock arrives.
Yeah.
When it was really truly an underground publication. Maybe the first 10 years of Interview Magazine when Andy Warhol was running it himself.
That was a great one. I forgot about that.
National Lampoon, which of course parlayed into a lot of those films in the late 70s, early 80s. Playboy, where I worked for many years as an editor myself, but there was a time where you could claim you read Playboy for the articles. I don't.
You took the words out of my mouth.
It really wasn't when we were growing up, but in the 60s and 70s, when it was still sort of natural.
But there were great interviews, like John Lennon. I remember.
Yeah. I mean, the first Playboy interview is Alex Haley interviewing Miles Davis. I mean,
wow.
It's like,
I didn't know about that one.
That's the first Playboy interview. I think
that is a crazy interview. I got to read that.
1962.
Wow.
Which then became, so Stop Smiling was sort of rooted in this idea of long form journalism and storytelling, which of course around 95 was the beginning of blurb culture and the internet coming about and email and search engines. And so in a way it was sort of reacting against the trend at the time, which was where long form went from being 5,000 words to nowadays long form to young people would probably be 1,200 words.
Right.
Because of the shorter articles and the attention span that has come with the smartphone culture, the internet culture, the blurb culture. So in a way, the magazine was sort of a response to that. What's interesting is we saw the writing on the wall. I wouldn't have thought about this at the time, and I've maybe said this once before, but 2020 hindsight is great when you have the distance to sort of put it together. But as it relates to creativity, I think this is a relevant point. YouTube came out. 6 months later, Facebook came out. 6 months later was the 2008 crash.
Yeah.
I think that's what killed most of the...
It was a perfect storm.
It killed most of the independent magazines. It killed almost all the alternative weeklies, which when we were growing up, that's how you found out about what band was in town or what was going on.
Well, it wasn't that long ago that I was reading Henry Rollins' article. What was that in the...
LA Weekly.
Yeah, I love that. And then suddenly it's gone.
Yeah, and these things stopped being viable businesses in part because the ad model collapsed because of things like Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace and things like that. But what's sad is that nothing really replaced it. And now we're back to, it was probably always like this, but now it seems more pronounced where these oligarchs own all of the media and are using them in a way that William Randolph Hearst used it in the early 20th century as a plaything for whatever political bent they have.
Right.
And so a lot of these places have returned to having paywalls, but then that excludes tons of young people from being able to read, the Nick Cave review from Cruel World in the LA Times unless you have a subscription.
Right.
You can't read now whatever someone wrote about that show that went.
And it's tricky because nobody, with what's going on with this administration and money, nobody can have every app. A lot of times people send me an article. I'm like, all right, I already have 10 subscriptions.
Yes, exactly.
But I would, back in the day, be like, okay, Peter Gabriel's on the cover of Mojo magazine. I'm just going to buy that one issue. And I felt good because that was going to the magazine.
And this is also, I should back up, the collapse of the newsstand culture. Like, I've been here for about 13 years.
Yeah.
And even before I lived here, this was one of the great newsstand beacons of the West Coast. There was newsstands almost everywhere. And yeah, they would have cigarettes and other things for sale. Now there's maybe 5 in the entire city, and you have to go out of your way to find them. There's one in Larchmont. There's one at the farmer's market.
I think there's still one off Hollywood. I'm trying to think the cross street. Maybe it's Wilcox, but there's one around there. But like, I love Mojo and Uncut. I like a lot of the English magazines. They're getting harder and harder to find.
Totally.
I used to go into Barnes & Noble and grab those.
Yes, exactly. And like us losing the Tower and Virgin Megastore and Borders, which for whatever you think of them as, you know, big box stores, that was a place where you could get lost and find, and there was the art of discovery.
And wait, we got to tell everybody that we both worked at Barnes & Noble.
Yes, we did.
I was in Rochester, New York. Where were you when you worked there?
I was in first in the suburbs of Chicago when I was a teenager, then transferred into the city when I was going to college. And I also worked at Tower Records. It was actually Rose Records, which was sort of the Tower of the Midwest, because they had Ticketmaster. They had multiple stores.
Ticketmaster. Oh,
and then Tower bought Rose maybe in the early 90s. And I have to say, it was such a great musical education and cultural education, because without having worked at these places, I don't know if I would have figured out how to run my own publishing operation.
Right.
You know, coupled with, you know, so I did these zines. Stop Smiling was really originally like a handmade zine that I made at Kinko's.
Wow.
And then morphed into this glossy, you know, after about 5 years. But it was through that I got I guess it was a call. This is pre-email.
That's funny that you say the Kinko's thing, because I was telling you I'm a drummer. I used to have a lot of bands back in Rochester, New York. And back then, if I wanted to put a cassette out, I would have to make the cover, go to Kinko's
and make it off yourself.
Make all the covers, and hand put them all together. And it sounds like that's what you did with your zine.
Yeah, and of course, everybody who was doing zines befriended people there or knew people there. And they used to have like a little card that you would put into the machine. Yeah. My friend would load it up with like $5,000, and I would sit there all night running off all this shit for free.
Yeah.
You know, of course, FedEx comes in later and buys Kinko's and kind of ruins it in a way from what its original intent was. And if I remember correctly, it's called Kinko's because it was started by a weird hippie guy in I think Denver, Colorado. And so it had sort of hippie origins, you know, which is very typical of, you know, that sort of boomer generation where like you're a 60s counterculture kid and by the 80s you're a Reagan Democrat. My parents are kind of victims of this as well. And then, you know, by now they're into the libertarian, you know, nuttiness.
Didn't you also work for Pitchfork too?
Yes. That was much later. I grew up with the guys who ran Pitchfork. In fact, Brett DiCrescenzo, who was the main kind of snark writer at the time in the sort of 90s heyday of Pitchfork, worked with me at Barnes & Noble, as did Scott Flagenoff, who was who's now the head of Apple Music, but was then the managing editor of Pitchfork later, and Ken Shipley, who runs Numero Group, which is one of the best reissues labels. We all worked there, as did Sybil, my wife.
That's crazy.
This was like 97 to like 99.
Mm-hmm.
And we all worked in the music section. And so we were playing, you know, like Eric Dolphy in the store, and people would come in and complain because they're like, what is this crazy shit? You know, it sounds like the alien spacecraft's landing.
Do some Sun Ra.
Yeah.
Totally confused.
I mean, it was a magical time to work at this store, too, because they had a big music section. They had all the DVDs, too, so you'd have all the Criterion stuff.
Yeah.
And I had held every shit job at Barnes & Noble. So, you know, I started being like the information desk guy, and then I, you know, worked in the cafe, and then I worked in the back in the stock room, and then I did like the bargain books, and then I helped curate the newsstand.
But this all led to what you do now. You know every aspect from the history, from the top to the bottom.
True.
That's amazing.
What's really kind of nuts is now that you and I are like middle-aged, is seeing how these things come in waves where, we were talking about this a minute ago before we started recording, where the boogeyman in the 90s were these big box stores. They were coming into these cities. They were moving into the Midwest. They were moving into Rochester, and they were decimating the indie record and book shops in those towns.
I got to add this. So my wife and I have been together 31 years. One of our first dates was we were in Rochester. We drove an hour or so to Ithaca, New York, and Stephen King was on tour on his motorcycle trying to save independent bookstores by riding around. And what did he do? We got there. We all sat on the ground. He read us a bedtime story that was terrifying.
Wow.
But look at that guy, even back then. So this is supporting what you're saying about Barnes & Noble and Borders.
Yeah. Well, it's just funny how the role reversal, like now Barnes & Noble seems like the indie. The guy, James Daunt, who's been brought in to turn the company around, I think he's done a remarkable job so far. He turned around Waterstones, which is the only chain left in England.
Yeah.
And he came from finance, but opened up these independent bookstores, Daunt Books.
Yeah.
And I think there's only like 5 of them, but he made them a destination. So people in London really supported them. So the people at Waterstones got wise to this, hired him to come and overhaul Waterstones, completely turn the store around.
Yeah.
Then a hedge fund bought Barnes & Noble, and they
how long ago was this?
Maybe 10 years ago with Waterstones, and maybe he's been at Barnes & Noble for 5 years.
Okay.
But there's a noticeable difference. Like if you go into any of the stores, especially in the last year or two, he's redesigned them all to look like Waterstone stores in the UK.
Wow.
So they feel less homogenized. And at the heart of what he did that turned Waterstones around was he let the regional chapters of this bookstore chain be themselves. So if you're in Bristol, you curate what people in Bristol would care about.
Right.
It's not coming from the top down, and that's what made independent stores so special is they would sort of curate to their audience based on where they were at. And the downfall of those sort of big box stores and why most of them went out of business was the homogenization of all of them being the same. So even if they would have a good selection, the interiors were quite drab. It was kind of this one size fits all.
There wasn't like a unique experience.
Absolutely.
And especially these days, to get someone to leave their home and go somewhere, it better be memorable.
Well, I think bookstores, and I won't get too far off track, but we're hoping to open one in Los Angeles this year. Everyone thinks that we're nuts to try to do something like this because of Amazon and the sort of obvious factors that one, if you're not in this industry, probably wouldn't realize. But because things have been so decimated in the independent record and bookstore space, because of streaming, because of online commerce or surveillance capitalism, which is, the sort of the Amazon effect, I guess, is that bookstores have now have a sort of a different purpose. Instead of just being a place of commerce, they're also a community space.
Yeah.
They're a place for people to exchange ideas. It's a place for people to come together of different political persuasions.
Meet some people.
Yeah, where everybody, not everyone is in the same tribe, but we all should be able to sit around and listen to this author, have a talk with somebody.
But I think what you're doing is so important because right now with our country being so divided, what I'm finding is when I go places, no matter who they are, people kind of get along when you see them face to face.
Yes.
It's just when they become cowardly online and they start saying the stuff that they would never say
in person
to another human.
Oh my God, such a
and so
really
what you're
great
doing is
point. Great
that you're bringing people together.
Yeah, and I think it'll help galvanize what we started. So Hat and Beard started after I was working. So to back up, I built the Pitchfork print magazine with not the founders, but the guys who were running the company at the time. And it only lasted for 3 years. Once Condé Nast bought the company, that was one of the first things they did was axe it. It was draining an enormous amount of resources. It was technically profitable, but not maybe to the degree that a bigger company would find valuable.
Right.
But in a way, Hat and Beard is an extension of what we were doing with Stop Smiling. And most of the people who were working with me on these books are the same people that I've been working with for like 30
That's
years.
Great.
And there's a continuity there. And a lot more of them now live in Los Angeles. It's kind of almost eerie how much of us lived in Chicago and New York when we were younger. So you guys
are like a jazz band. It's all intuitive. Everybody knows each other.
Yeah,
it must be like you could probably look at each other and be like, "Yeah, let's do that."
It is kind of like a jazz band. That's a great analogy. I mean, I should back up and say the name Hat and Beard is the first track on Eric Dolphy's record "Out to Lunch," which is actually a song about Monk. And if you think like
Monk
Hat
is
and
my
Beard,
favorite. That's why it blew me away that you called it
it's
that.
like if you think Hat and Beard, like Dolphy was evoking in the title of that song, Monk. It's like you think, he's at the piano, he's got the cigarette, he's got
spinning around,
he's got the fedora or the weird hat, and you see a silhouette of the beard, the cigarette, and the hat.
You know who it is.
Dolphy was from Los Angeles and was sort of a child prodigy as a musician. And when we founded the press, we wanted an LA reference. It is willfully obscure.
I love it.
It's funny. If you catch someone of a certain age, they'll get the reference. And then if it's anyone under 40, they'll ask me like incongruously, is this have anything to do with hipsters in Brooklyn? And I was like, and of course I've become the avatar because I, generally have a hat on.
Right now, you do have a hat and a beard.
And I have long hair, and I'm like become the avatar for the company.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, like it's not what we're doing with books is almost the same mission that we had with the magazine, which is we're doing these subcultures, and it's a deep dive into whatever the subject is. So I'm friends with the...
Yeah, so you are doing something very similar, just a slightly different format.
Yeah, I mean, magazines and newspapers as a business model are dead, and books, I would say, are equally almost impossible to make money with. Without getting too far into the weeds, like there's one distributor left for all books in America.
Wow.
Run by a Christian nationalist company outside Nashville.
What's that called?
Ingram.
Okay.
Not everyone who works there espouses these views, but it is a company that is, if you look into the history of it, has done more to destroy the book publishing industry and homogenize it in a corporate sense.
Yeah.
Than even Amazon at a certain point, because Amazon, of course, came in with this disruptive model of selling books at a loss, and that has certainly been devastating. But monopoly power, whether it's wielded by Jeff Bezos or this company Ingram,
right,
has made the distribution process profitless by design.
Right.
If you have a back catalog and you've been in business for 50 years, they're going to give you terms for that back catalog that they wouldn't offer a new publisher like us.
Right.
Since we've started, every strategy has had to be, we've got to sell half of these ourselves or we're going to lose our pants financially, because every copy sold to a store, whether it's on Amazon or to an independent shop, we're making no money off of it. And the public has no clue because they've been very clever about keeping this out of the press. And I can understand why. Like the independent bookstores would be screwed without Ingram, yet Ingram has done more to let Amazon have the biggest market share they've ever had. Like when we started doing this 10 years ago, I don't think Amazon even had 50% of the sales of all books in America, and now they're at something like 73%.
And they started as a book company, right? Amazon?
Yeah, I mean, basically Jeff Bezos is on record saying, I saw how the book business was a gentleman's business with not a lot of profit margin, and I knew I could go in and destroy it by not making money on books and using books as a loss leader, much the way Sam Walton started Walmart to sort of put out the general store and the Ben Franklin stores.
It's a very familiar story we're hearing, unfortunately.
It's using certain product as a loss leader and then making profits on other things. So in Amazon's case, they make most of their money through their web services business. What was interesting is when he bought Whole Foods, in a way it really helped us galvanize people behind our direct-to-fan model of buying the books directly from us. Because prior to that, I don't think a lot of my friends understood what his business strategy was as a CEO. I know he's since moved on and there's someone else as CEO. But when he bought Whole Foods, he started to do similar things that he did to the book publishing industry, where suddenly he lowered the prices. He offered 2 or 3 hour free delivery, things that were not sustainable at all,
right,
but would capture the convenience motif amongst customer bases. And so
we live in an instant gratification society right now.
So people started to see, this is going to hurt Sprouts and Trader Joe's if we shop here. And so a lot of my friends did stop shopping at Whole Foods because of the Bezos effect, seeing that what he did to books was now going to happen in this other line of work. He decided to buy Whole Foods. His strategy was, let's do things that are completely unsustainable financially, but they will hurt the other competition in that mindset of, healthier, fresher food, grocery store chains.
Yeah.
And Trader Joe's and Sprouts have almost built their entire model on being the alternative to Whole Foods, which was referred to when I was growing up as whole paycheck.
Yeah. I was trying not to say that, but you're right.
I mean, I know it's a cliche, and it maybe isn't true now because they have lowered the prices. What sucks is that I don't think a lot of people get as far as we've come, because it's been a labor of love for my wife and I, in that we've taken a pay cut the entire time and have had to work other jobs.
By trying to do the right thing.
By trying to do the right thing, and also experimenting in a marketplace that only makes sense if you have a multinational parent company that can absorb the amount of losses that one would have to get. I don't remember what the exact number is, but there was a trial a couple years ago where Penguin Random House, the largest publisher, tried to buy Simon & Schuster, the second largest publisher. Yeah. And luckily, Joe Biden was still president, and for once, the antitrust laws held. And the deal did not go through. Random House had to pay a lot of fines for trying to create an unfair monopoly, but someone took the transcripts of the trial and published it as a book. And it's like a 1,000-page tome. But if you read it, it shows you how the entire business is basically rigged, and the only way it makes any sense is if these multinationals are basically paying for 90 to 95% of what comes out to lose money. And then there's that 5% that does make money. I can't speak.
This is just, I brought up earlier, but we were just showing our son that movie, The Short Story with Christian Bale. Yeah. And it's pretty much exactly what you're saying. Yeah. What was going down in 2008.
Yes. And it's like every mode of business is now controlled. Like, even just looking at like UPS and FedEx, they have a complete lock on basically bulk shipping in America. Thank God we still have book rate, which if the post office ever gets rid of it, we would go out of business instantly because we'd have no affordable way to mail.
What is book rate? I don't know about that.
It's been around since, I think, the founding of the post office. It's called Special Fourth Class. It's had a couple different names over the years, but it's ostensibly what it is the post office offering a special rate for book publishers to be able to mail books that are heavy to people in the mail at a discounted rate. Wow. If it didn't exist, almost everything we make would immediately by weight go up to priority mail.
Yeah, I'm looking around now and I see a lot of heavy books, which I love.
That would then be passed down to the consumer, right? So then if they knew, especially in the age of Amazon where they have free shipping through Amazon Prime, I think a medium priority mail box is now $17 or $18.98. So if the book's $50, then you'd be looking at paying, in addition to tax, another $20 to get it shipped. Oh my God. So then you're looking at $100 to just buy the book that only costs retail $50. You will factor in the 10% tax and then another $30 for shipping. Maybe it's not quite $100, but right. So the book rate has been that's how we ship most books to people. But almost every industry has been kind of rigged by monopoly power. One of the reasons we make all of our books, most of them, except for the smaller literary titles, but the art books per se have to be made in Europe, is because there's only 3 paper suppliers in North America. So none of the printers here, there's some other factors that drive the prices up. But the main factor is that the binderies are not on the premises of most of the public printers in America. And they're also having to buy the paper from these, 3 paper suppliers. Whereas in Europe, there's 30 paper suppliers. So there's actual competition. And so that's how the book can be half as much to print in Europe. Yes, you've got to ship it here, but the euro and the dollar are on the same exchange rate for the most part.
Are you guys getting hurt by the tariffs?
Yes, not directly in the sense that, they made sure books and magazines were immune to the tariffs, but nothing's really immune to what they're doing with the tariffs because the tariff policy makes no sense. If they actually were using tariffs the way they could be used to actually re-industrialize America, they'd need to do a 10-year plan that would actually incentivize people to come back here and produce things. Yeah. But by just throwing this into the mix of just chaos, what we've seen since the tariff nonsense started is that the printers are doubling their shipping costs and their production costs to cover their ass. So that if there is these extra expenses, that's how they're covering it.
They're doing like a preemptive.
Yeah, and I've seen it. Like the shipping of everything we've made since the tariff stuff started is about double what it was 9 months ago or something before Trump got in. So there's a palpable effect. Now we're technically thrilled that books themselves are technically exempt, whereas I have friends that like make a product that has to be made in China and for better or for worse, the company cannot survive because the tariffs are so crazy that whatever they're charging their customers, it's so far off with post-tariff that the business itself no longer makes any financial sense. I should point out, too, one of the things that we did with Hat and Beard when we started, which has probably hurt us financially, is that we have a best practices that is sort of rooted in punk rock. You know, where I kind of come out of like the indie music scene of Chicago in the 90s. And
very DIY, right?
Yeah, it's very DIY. I worked at Touch and Go and Drag City and Merge when I was a kid. And there was like an ethos behind what we were doing. It wasn't, you know, there was, you know, at the time there was an ethos behind making those records at the time and recording them in a certain way. And there was a time where physical product, if you sold a bunch of records on an indie label in the 90s before the streaming disrupted everything, bands could buy a house with that money, you know, and make a living.
God forbid there were royalties. So if you were an introvert like Tom Waits,
yes,
here's a guy that barely plays live, but he had so many royalties, he could live off of that.
Totally.
You know, and I don't think that would happen these days. You got to stay. That's why, you know, I took my kids to see Peter Gabriel last year, and everybody in the band is in their 70s. People have to stay on tour to make an income.
It's true. I feel blessed, you know, since we're talking about the music analogy, like, I feel like my musician friends have been hurt a lot worse by...
I don't know how they survive.
You know, by what's happened with the so-called digital age or the post-digital age or the post-digital age, wherever we're at now. And that's kind of what keeps Sybil and I going in a way. Like the odds are stacked against anyone who's doing anything independent.
Yeah.
But with books, I think there has been this kind of resurgence of, you know, not everything works on the tablet. Not everything works on your phone. And
I think there's a lot of people like my wife and I, a lot of times, because no matter what job you have to be on your phone. You have to be on your computer. Yes. We love to get home, put a record on, and then read a book.
Yes.
And none of these things are plugged in. And oh my God, then we might start talking.
Right. Serendipity, prevails in those sort of analog situations. And, and I know that it's never going to go back to a pre-digital age. But I mean, one of the things like this weekend, you know, there's a book fair. That's sort of one of the kind of bread and butter things that keeps us going is that there's all these art book fairs that all started about a decade ago. Little bit longer in some cases. And you'll go to these things. The San Francisco one is this weekend, so we leave on Thursday.
Yeah.
There's one every month in a different city. It's tricky to do all of them because you've got to get the product there, you got to get yourself there, you got hotels. Luckily, SF, living in LA, you can just drive up. We're probably going to drop ship some stuff today and drive up the rest. But there's this kind of visceral reaction, and it's a multi-generational thing where tens of thousands of people will pour through this thing over the next, Thursday through Sunday. Yeah. And if you add up what we are selling in those 4 days, it would take the distributor with all their cuts.
Right.
Like that's more in like 4 days than they're going to pay us in like 3 months of, what happens when 80%. And I should say, just so people know real numbers here, I don't know. The record business, I heard, is a little bit more favorable still towards the record labels when it comes to physical product. But with books, this is one drawback. We don't have the streamers disrupting everything the way music has been disrupted. Right. But the distributors, the new industry standard is that the publishers get 20% of the sale and the wholesaler and the retailer take 80%. And the book costs more than 20%.
Yeah. So you're getting a loss.
Nothing. It's a loss, and everything that's out there, unless you cut out the wholesaler. So what we did earlier this year is we exited stage left all corporate distribution, which is really risky because then you can't get into most of the stores. They've created kind of an extortion plot in that they're a monopoly. So the only way you can get into
like
certain
payola,
stores,
but worse.
Yeah, it's like I mean, if you go back to the beginning of rock and roll, it's like the beginning of rock and roll, where the distributor has made the terms for the stores so loosey-goosey, and certainly way more so after COVID, because during COVID, they extended the terms to the indie stores to keep them from going under. Yeah. And that was probably the right thing to do.
Right.
We would have lost hundreds more indie stores had they not done this. But when COVID rescinded, they didn't rescind those terms. So just to talk math for a second, for anyone who's in the creative world and is listening, The shops used to have like 30 to 60 days to pay, which is pretty normal.
Yep.
Now they have 120 days to pay, 50% discount, free shipping, which is basically a 60% discount. And they can return stuff. So they'll buy like 50 copies of a bunch of various books. If they return half of them a year later, the whole thing's a wash. So is it even a sale?
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of The Cuts Are Nuts with my good friend J.C. Gabel. This is such an intense conversation that I broke it into 6 parts, and I hope you'll come back for part 2, which should be up in a few days. While you're waiting, please take a second and go to hatandbeard.com. Hat and Beard is an independent Los Angeles-based publisher and print production house. With our book imprint, Hat and Beard Press, we create original illustrated nonfiction books of pop, cultural, and historical significance that draw on existing cult audiences. As a production house, via Hat and Beard Projects, we produce artist monographs in conjunction with art galleries, museums, nonprofits, and artists themselves. We also champion the redesign and reissue of classic visual culture titles worth a second look. Hat and Beard Films, meanwhile, works as the motion picture production arm of the company. Having produced 2 films, we are currently in production of 2 others. If you are also a voracious reader, please take a second, go to hatandbeard.com, and dig what's going on. Check out the 75 books they've already published, and there's more stuff on the way. I'll see you next for part 2 of The Cuts Are Nuts with J.C. Gabel on Creativity is the Cure.